Yeah, if you allow, I will switch to German in order to have some changes. Vielen Dank für die Einladung.
For the invitation.
React to the previous speakers, and in particular I will thank Mr. Bauer for his clarifications, which I fully share in terms of Ukraine and other issues. Wenn Sie gestatten, 3 Bemerkungen im Hinblick auf die Zukunft.
To make 3 comments in terms of the future Commission. I believe there are 3 major issues. One thing has already been said, the competitiveness. The European Union can only develop further and can only become and remain a global factor if we do our internal homework in terms of competitiveness of the European Union. And let me say first and foremost, as a commissioner for the budget, it's not a matter of the EU budget, because the EU budget alone cannot solve that problem. It's a matter of also regulations. In spring, we heard Enrico Letta's report, the former Italian Prime Minister, who submitted a report on the future of the single market. The internal market, I believe, is the biggest asset of the European Union. We are by far the most attractive market. The single market is, well, the biggest market in the world, and we need to uphold this and develop it further. And we have to say quite openly that a lot of this single market has not been completed yet. There's a number of technical barriers. There's various studies that all reach the result that if the single market were completed the way it was originally intended, then there would be savings potential for the economy, but also for public administration to the tune of 200 to 450 billion euros per year. So that is the annual budget of the EU, actually 2.5 times the EU annual budget. And that's only the changes on the regulatory side. All it takes is political will. But of course, it's decisive to ensure that we achieve progress. And let me also say, and that will be the central topic for the upcoming Commission, is that we need to strengthen the European economy and industry. There's no economy without the industry, and I think small and medium-sized enterprises alone are not enough. So it's not enough to have a wonderful tourism destination here in Europe. No, we need the whole bag, and we also need a flourishing industry. We have all the prerequisites, everything that it takes. We have well-trained people. We have wonderful innovation and research. We have by far the biggest research budget worldwide, but where we're still weak is how to translate research results and the results of innovation into business cases. And that is also due to the fact that the European economy is financed through banks to the tune of 80%, and only 20% is venture capital. In the US, it's the other way around. And we need to introduce this move to change this. So we need more venture capital. We need to make sure that our research results that are generated here in Europe are implemented here in Europe. And quite often, patents are sold abroad, outside of Europe. So the prerequisites exist. We just need to use these prerequisites. And this takes me to the second point. Jean-Claude Juncker, a couple of years ago at the Munich Security Conference, talked about the global policy capability. So you see that at the global level, we are facing various challenges. I think it's been said time and again. Europe was divided up into three comfort zones. The first one was cheap energy coming from the east, preferably from Russia. And security assured by the US. And thirdly, cheap technology coming from China or from Far East. So all these three comfort zones no longer exist. We need to react to this. Reacting to this means that our sovereignty, our independence needs to be strengthened. We're not going to be independent in all areas, because in certain areas, for example, we depend on raw materials and rare earths. But if we could manage to ensure that here in Europe we reasonably recycle the old cell phones that people throw away, this would be huge potential. 100 million mobile phones become obsolete here. If we could properly collect and recycle those mobile phones, then we could reduce the import of raw materials. We would need to import less. This reduces our dependence and increases our political standing. But it's also important to remember that, globally speaking, we need to create the right prerequisites for what we do. And in this connection, I would like to not really contradict Foreign Minister Seato, but I'd like to introduce a different perspective, because he says quite rightly that in Hungary, European automotive manufacturers are working side by side with Chinese ones. But the Chinese can work here because they can use the benefits of the single market. And all we wish for is that European companies should have the same market access conditions in the Chinese market. Reciprocity is the key word here. And if that is ensured, then it's good. But currently, that is not the case. So that's one of our central tasks that we need to accomplish in the years to come. This is what we're working on, and we need to be aware of that. It's about reciprocity. It's about having equal conditions, a level playing field for all. If that is not the case, we need to act. And this is based on my experience, because I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and I remember a discussion many years ago with the representatives of a major European corporation who told me, protect us from the Chinese in Europe, but in a way to ensure that we can still continue to be present in China. You can't do this halfways. Either we are consistent in what we do, then this may hurt one or the other company or industry, but at the end of the day, it's about setting the right framework, the right boundary conditions for our companies to be able to act globally. And the European economy is by far the most international one in terms of exports as well as imports, production in Europe and outside of Europe. So once again, let me say that with our competitive approach, we need to act globally and make sure that we are a global player. And we're not caught up between US and American, between American and Chinese interests, because a new world order that is based on rules, on agreements, on contracts that are respected. And if there is an argument, then there's arbitration proceedings, and these results are binding and need to be implemented. And as far as that is concerned, we have a lot of allies here. We can count on India, Southeast Asia, some countries in Africa, Latin America, the US, Canada, Japan, etc. So there's a large number of like-minded countries, as they're called, that have a rule-based world order approach, But of course, we need to be committed for such a rule-based order. And I think Europe needs to take the lead here. And one last comment. As a commissioner for the budget, we are talking about the multi-annual framework for the budget, where the current budget, as far as its structure is concerned, is not fit for the future. It's not fit for the future in terms of the size as well as the composition. I'm not going to enter into too much detail, but currently the European budget constitutes 1% of the European economic output. The national budgets constitute 30 to 40% of the output. So with this 1%, we accomplish common tasks that are in the interest of all citizens. This approach of sending money to Brussels, some would even say that we are wasting the money we're sending to Brussels. Well, this is a completely wrong approach, and the understanding should be that Brussels or Europe works on behalf of its citizens upon the decisions taken by its member states, and we need to act globally, and for these global actions we need to provide the necessary funding. Currently, 2/3 of the spending are for agriculture and cohesion funds, yes. Increasingly, there is a need to also invest in defense. That is not covered by the current budget. There's a need to act globally, and we don't have the necessary funding for that either. So we will have to sit down and really discuss what it is that we want to achieve, how much will they cost, and how can we finance that. There are many ideas that are out there and that have been introduced, and due to time reasons I can't go into detail here, but all I'm saying is that we need a substantial debate about the budget, about the next multi-annual budget framework, because a budget is policies cast into figures. And one last comment, because as a neighborhood commissioner, and in light of what Prime Minister Miskovsky said, well, I'd like to talk about enlargement. I've always held a view, either we export stability or we import instability. And I fully understand the criticism, and it's a justified criticism leveled by Prime Minister Miskovsky in terms on how the European member states are dealing with North Macedonia. And this is why one of our ideas, and I said this in our Western Balkan strategy, and we passed this already in 2017 and 2018, that if a new country becomes a member, based on the current experiences, we are already saying that new members cannot bilaterally block any future members that are still in the waiting room. Because what we're currently seeing, and this is also what we have seen in the past between Slovenia and Croatia and so on and so forth. So there are many examples of this. Also, Austria had some issues with its accession negotiations. I think the former foreign minister can attest to that. So this is nothing new, and this is not in line with the European spirit. So accession negotiations cannot be blocked by bilateral vetoes or similar measures or behaviors. But let me tell you another thing. Foreign Minister Seato unfortunately had to leave. A lot of the problems we are currently seeing in the accession negotiations are the result of experiences gained by many of our member states with the developments of member states that joined since 2004, and also in terms of the rule of law and the development of the rule of law in some countries. And conversely, to be fair, we have to say some of the accession candidates are also countries where the rule of law will play a role also in future. And this is why we need two things. This will be a difficult exercise, but I believe it's indispensable. So we need to see a further development of our tools and instruments that help to ensure rule of law. And in a couple of weeks, I'm going to submit a proposal to that effect that is independent of the financial means of pressure that we're currently using. So currently, we have tools in terms of enforcing the rule of law in some countries, but it is on the basis of not making certain payments if people do not comply with the rule of law. But in future, there might be a situation where countries who don't need this money might also cause problems. So this is why we need to develop this set of instruments further. And the second thing that is possible without any change of agreements or treaties is that we should move from the principle of unanimity to the principle of a majority. And thus we can obtain decisions that will help us to be an active player in the world, and to not only react. I'm seeing the ambassador of Ukraine here. Yesterday, an Austrian journalist asked me, because in the near future, at the end of the week, we are going to celebrate the Austrian National Day. And, well, the Austrian National Day is the first day where Austria was free. And we still remember how it was when we had our territorial sovereignty back. And unfortunately, this is something that is still very topical in 2024. So in 1955, we were pleased when the last soldiers left. And this is also something that we should grant Ukraine in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. You see that we are rearranging our stage for the discussion. It won't take so long, so some patience, please. Just 1 or 2 minutes, then it will be done. We have some quick workers here.
Seconds, minutes. Jetzt? Ich glaube schon. Es dauert noch ein bisschen.
Ingrid Lorenz. Ingrid Lorenz.
Pleased to meet you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're all set now for the panel discussion. Wir können fortsetzen mit unserer Panel-Diskussion. Ich darf...
We go now with our panel discussion, and please take your seats. You see here some name tags already prepared on the stage. Commissioner Hahn is present as well. So thank you very much. Thanks to all of you.
That's what I heard, that we should do it like this. Do you have translation earplug? Yeah, so, okay, but you speak... You don't need it anyway? Okay. Okay, okay. So, lassen Sie mich zu Beginn das Panel kurz vorstellen.
Let me introduce you to our panelists. I'm very happy that we have you here. On my right, we have Pavlina Žáková, Deputy Minister for European Union Affairs, and she comes to us from the Czech Republic. Give her a round of applause. Thanks indeed. Then here on my left, we have the Deputy State Secretary for EU Affairs in the Foreign Ministry of Latvia. Nice to have you. Good morning. Then we have Mark Speich, State Secretary for European Affairs and International Affairs in the marvelous state of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. Furthermore, we have Gabriele Abels, Jean Monnet Professor of EU Politics, Federalism and Parliamentarism at Tübingen University in Germany. And then I'm very happy also to have here with us Johannes Hahn, the former EU Budget Commissioner. Thank you very much, Mr. Hahn.
Commissioner Hahn has raised and touched a lot of subjects. And the issue of this panel is, without reforms, there is no future in the European Union. Could you just, from the top of your head, tell me, what do you think are the most important reforms that the European Union should do to be competitive in this very new world, which is obviously in turmoil? Because, as Mr. Hahn has mentioned, there are some countries, Russia, China, for instance, but also others, who try to create a new world order and who want to abolish the liberal international order. So how should Europe cope with that, please?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel. It's a real honor, and I would like to congratulate also the Institute for the Regions of Europe for their 20th anniversary, which they celebrated yesterday. As to your question, there are plenty of challenges as regards the European competitiveness. And I think that the two reports that Mr. Hahn also mentioned in his speech, the report by Mario Draghi on the future of European competitiveness and the report by Enrico Letta on the single market, these reports give us a clear recipe, what should be done, what reforms should be done. In both reports, we see that the recipe is on one hand less Europe in some sense, and this is about deregulation, about legislation, about let's say subsidiarity principle. So as regards regulation, there is a clear understanding in the business, but also I think at the political level now, that something needs to be done and that the European economy is all regulated, and that the European legislation contributes to this. So we need less Europe in the sense that we need less regulation and less reporting. In this sense, the political guidelines of Ursula von der Leyen and also the mission letters for the specific commissioner candidates show or are promising that for a vice president of the Commission for Simplification, Valdis Dombrovskis. And in all mission letters, we can see a call for more simplification, be it the targets for reporting, 25% down for reporting, or 35% down for SMEs, focus and emphasis on better regulation, on data-based, evidence-based regulation, impact assessment, all these competitiveness checks, stress tests, etc. So this is on one hand, the regulation. On the other hand, Draghi and Letta, they call for more Europe in the sense that they see a need to have more Europe in the single market. Single market is the greatest asset that we have, as Mr. Jan also said. Mr. Hahn also said, and there is a call for finishing the single market in many areas, not only goods and services, but also energy infrastructure, digital markets, telecoms, because we need to scale up. And single market gives us more competition, and this is what we need also for competitiveness. So and other common solutions that Draghi proposes are more common action in terms of joint purchases, common European projects, and also more effort in common financing. And this is about a larger EU budget, which is proposed in the Draghi report. We will see how it evolves, how the discussions evolve over the next years.
Well, thank you. Well, let's stay with the economic topic for a while, so that we don't get it mixed up. Also bleiben wir bei der Wirtschaft vielleicht. Mir ist vorhin eingefallen, also das Thema Deregulierung gibt es jetzt wirklich schon.
Deregulation, we've been speaking about it for so long already, and I can remember very well that Edmund Stoiber, the former Prime Minister of Bavaria, had the rewarding task to analyze all regulations and directives in order to find which ones might be superfluous. So this is a problem, an issue for the EU for quite long already. Why do you believe, dear State Secretary Leverenze, why is it so difficult to deregulate? Wo ist hier das Problem?
Very good intentions and even very good decisions. But when it comes to implementation, then unfortunately the results are not that impressive as we expect. Where is the problem? Well, we try to solve any kind of problem which might appear somewhere. But the problem is that life is much more rich than our rules we can propose to solve any kind of problem. And then we have, after some time, kind of controversies between rules we introduced 2 years ago and between rules who were supposed to improve rules introduced 2 years ago. And then we have a really never-ending story of it. And of course, Latvia supports as well firstly the over-regulation. We, as a member states, with a 20 years of practice of it, we could really observe how all this grows and grows and grows, yeah. And now we really see the problem with it, as well as to reduce the bureaucratic burden, yeah, especially that's important for our country, as we have mostly medium and small enterprises. And for them, really, that is really very, very difficult to to do all the needed bureaucratic procedures. By big enterprises, maybe that is not so difficult because they have people for it, but small ones, if they have to hire special people to fill out all the necessary formulas, then really they have no time to work, no time to add to our competitiveness.
Staatssekretär Speich, ich weiß nicht, wie es Ihnen geht in Deutschland, wenn man bei uns zum Unternehmer Lieferkettengesetz
I don't know how it's in Germany. If we say supply chain legislation in Austria, all entrepreneurs are already angry. And it's taken as an example for overregulation. And so it's difficult to use the energy in the right manner. Do you share this view that many things maybe are going wrong in spite of the best intentions, which have also just been mentioned? The supply chain regulation and legislation, from my perspective, is an oft-cited example, but it is just an example of many more. And both previous speakers have said so already. I would say it's kind of a preemptive risk avoidance. And this is not typical of EU legislation because, honestly speaking, it also appears very often in national legislation and also on the level of the federal states of the Länder of Germany, for instance, like in Austria. And in the supply chain legislation, it's so difficult because it's an enormous complexity in terms of implementation for many companies. And in so complex supply chains, it's so difficult to also mention and address all these risks. One example, which for our land in Germany has been important for a while already, it's a question, for instance, related to the marble which we need for construction sites. We have to certify that the material, mostly marble, has been produced under humane conditions. And you might believe that most marble comes from Italy, but it's a matter of fact that particularly also India and China are the suppliers. So you just try to find out all conditions of the extraction of marble in India, for instance, and to tell to the companies this has been done under humane conditions. To prove all this under the conditions of authoritarian states is, of course, very difficult. And here we are talking stones, marble only. There are much more complex supply chains, obviously, and if then there are questions of third-party liability also, it's not only an implementation problem, but also an issue of responsibility, and that's even more complex. And an almost philosophical question is what I call preemptive risk avoidance. Just a final example, if I may. It has nothing to do with the EU, but it's quite conspicuous. In Germany, that's fire protection. Since 2010 in Germany, we have been having a constant number of casualties caused by fire. And since 2010, we have been having a permanent increase of the complexity of fireproofing rules. And so construction is getting more and more complex and expensive, and so fewer flats or apartments are built. So here we see, on the one hand, the overregulation, and on the other hand, the implementation, which doesn't work any longer. And the same thing happens on the European level. And here certainly we have to see how much risk we want to avoid or tolerate. A question to a politologist, Ms. Abels, in view also of the current situation we're in, and that's indeed unique. Do you believe that the right priorities have been defined? first, maybe just a quick reaction as to German legislation. This, of course, is for the Länder and not for the federation in Germany, as we know how it is in a federal state. So here, indeed, the reduction of complexity is a bit difficult. And back to priorities, the question is, what do you want to achieve? And the question here also is that we do not know precisely any longer, and we've never known, what the European Union is to be, actually. Is it mainly the internal market? How much more of internal market do we want to have and can we have in geopolitically difficult eras? The internal market, what is its strength and where is the competitive edge? And this, of course, potentially speaking, also means its strength, Europe's strength, also beyond economic factors. So even without talking money, security politics is so important. And so it is an important aspect, and my proposal would be that when it comes to preparing legislation on the European level, the stakeholders should be embedded, should be integrated much more. We keep hearing about negative connotations as to lobbying on the European level, but of course they have to be integrated. And the topic of the regions is so important. The Committee of the Regions, what can they do? Can they maybe get more far-reaching competencies for the bundling of interests in order to also avoid over-regulation, because that's problematic. And maybe I can just mention one example of over-regulation. Of course, I do not want to blame myself here, but I believe that as to the dispatch and posting directive of the EU, I believe that it's overly complex just to be to get the approval of being posted and sent here to Salzburg. So the posting directive is just one example. And why have certain elements not been exempted from the posting directive? It's just one marvelous example, which shows very well what overregulation means. And it happens in so many areas. If, as a plumber, for instance, I'm posted, it's different from a scientist going to a conference. We won't tell anyone, but as a political scientist, how could one get into a situation where there is de-bureaucratization? So maybe also Commissioner Hahn then can tell us more about this. Those who are in charge of the implementation have to be integrated much more in order to see what it actually means on the ground, what it means at the level of regions, of municipalities, of enterprises, when I say regulation has to go down. Given all the structures there are in Brussels, more open-mindedness is required, more expertise is to be integrated into the political discussion process in order to see as early as possible what can be done with a perspective of subsidiarity. What can be entrusted to the nation states and what can be even entrusted to the regions within the member states. Dear Commissioner, why are there so many bureaucratic obstacles which by many then are felt as annoying, and why it is so difficult to get rid of them? Because we are how we are. It has been addressed here already. We cannot say that in Brussels, in an ivory tower, we invent complexity, but it's a reaction to a fundamental mentality, and everything is to be secured, is to be protected. And in my keynote, I said, in Europe, enterprises, 80% are bank funded and 20% by venture capital. This also shows that we always have this spirit of risk avoidance. We want to protect, to secure everything. And just as an anecdote, a quarter of a century ago, I was operated on in the Vienna General Hospital. In order to prepare that, I got a pill for sedation, but bad luck was that between the room I was in and the operation theater, I was asked 3 or 4 times what my name was, and then when I was back on the in the surgery room, I was awake already. Well, then of course they sedated me again. But this is the result of so many individual cases, and quite often, as we know, there are some major mistakes, and then this is translated into a general rule. So each and every individual case, of course, has to be analyzed with a view to quality assurance, but we have a certain tendency, we want to cast everything into a rule. Next point, why is there a European Supply Chain Act? Because in the meantime, there are several national supply chain acts. Germany, France and others, and it was an attempt, not entirely successful as we see, to avoid that there is a national tangle of so many different supply chain acts. And here also, dear Professor, there are of course different lobbies, and there were some from the realms of economy which who were not so unhappy with that supply chain act, because for the big players it's a certain competitive edge over the smaller ones. And here again, and I speak pro domo, we have to be more sensitive, I would say, and we have to listen to the small and medium-sized ones, because they do not have all this communication apparatus as others do. This can relate to major industries or to big countries. And the final idea, for many years, I've been having the idea that no matter whether it's on the regional, national or European level, when it comes to legislation, there should be a so-called sunset clause, meaning there should be an automatic expiry date for every rule. And then one also says until when this has to be assessed again in order to find out, is that still necessary? Does it have to be adapted, or can it just be extended as is? This would prevent that more and more new things are produced, and lawmakers is the official term in English, so makers of the laws. So let's also deal them with what is existing and not prove every 5 years how many new acts or laws they have created. So if we try to reduce this, then we should also implement some measures so that the existing legislative structures are always analyzed in order to see whether they are still okay. And the Commission, just the major aspects, where should there be more money for it? First, of course, defense is a key area, and here it's most important also to implement common developments. We're having a first budget of around 10 billion for 7 years. Many say 100 billion is required, but this is of course a very rough ballpark figure, and there is talk of a common European armaments industry. I believe that's an illusion, but what is possible is a better coordination of the developments in the field of armament and marketing and purchasing. More than 80% of the European defense goods are purchased from outside of Europe. And that again is a question which has to be asked. And in Europe we have a fragmenting in the defense area, which is far from being efficient. But Ukraine proves day after day that they are in a position to use products which we make them available, where we say they can't communicate with each other. But there is a huge potential. Second major area from my perspective, that's of course some funding which is required in order to act on an international level. We have a gateway initiative which I believe should be exploited even more, strategically speaking. Where do we want to invest strategically? Where do we want to be present? And all of this, I believe, is not possible with today's budget. And I also do not believe that, for instance, the agricultural area and the cohesion area should be reduced. It's rather about something in addition. And I think that this should be affordable.
One of the biggest problems, in my view, in Europe is that it is not innovative enough. If you look at international successful tech companies, basically there is no European champion among them. And as you've mentioned, the Draghi report, do you find viable ideas in there to promote innovation? Or is that something which is not promoted easily on a government level and should be left to the companies?
Well, a part of the answer is funding. That was already mentioned, the Capital Markets Union, which would mobilize enough resources for funding also of innovation in Europe. Which would help the companies which are successful in developing ideas, because European companies are successful in developing ideas, the startups, but it would allow them to scale up. This is the biggest problem, that we have ideas here in Europe, but we are not able to scale up. And instead, the unicorns and these companies, they are leaving towards the US. So funding and of course regulation is a part of the answer. Then I believe that in some sectors it does make sense to join forces and to focus resources on big projects of European interest. Be it in the area of AI or pharmaceuticals, for example, or defense industry, because we can't afford all European countries to develop, these solutions to these big, let's say, innovation challenges individually. So these are the answers.
Right. Well, Draghi also suggested that he mentioned really a huge sum which should be invested every year, like billions.
700, 800.
700
every year.
Every year. So well, maybe I'm a little bit naive, but who should pay for that?
It's a good question. It's a complicated answer. Well, of course, the next MFF should reflect the level of EU ambition. Yeah. Right now, as Commissioner Hahn mentioned, we are paying 1%, and with this 1% from our GDP, we are trying to finance all our needs. Yeah, but needs are growing, challenges as well. There are new emerging challenges. Geopolitical situation has changed. It means that we are facing a lot more objectives as before. Yeah, of course, you are as well right that we should be clear what kind of objectives we have and what we are supposed to do. In our view, the next MFF, the amount of it should be bigger.
All right.
That's true, but how to finance it? Maybe we have to look at some loan possibilities. Yeah. Okay. Because I don't see the unanimity among member states willing to pay more for the EU budget. That is something President Macron mentioned that we should pay 3%, for example, but I really don't see a very large support to it. From our side, of course, we understand that, yes, we are ready to pay more for EU budget. And well, we have to balance needs with possibilities.
All right. Thank you. Herr Speich, wie sehen Sie das? Ich meine, diese gemeinsame Schuldenaufnahme.
How do you see these common debts that we could incur? So this is something that was also heavily discussed in Germany. What do you think about this plan of Mario Draghi? Because it was also believed that the pandemic fund would be just a one-off, and now it's supposed to be institutionalized. So do you expect a broad-based political debate on that? I believe that this broad-based political debate has already begun. Not only from the German perspective, it's a very sensitive issue. I would say that there is an enormous need for infrastructure investments, that is quite clear, but that also refers to the defense landscape. It's not simply a German problem. The peace dividend is over, so we neglected investing in our military and defense capabilities. The same applies to questions relating to infrastructure, sometimes also with the military mentioned. So there is a need to invest. Secondly, I believe that it would be wrong to believe that these investments need to come from the public authorities. We need to favor private investments and need to lever private investments. So the Commission has said it. We also need to attract venture capital, much more so, like it's already being done in other parts of the world, where the share of venture capital in these kinds of financing deals are much higher. And thirdly, now I come to the sensitive part, I think that in Germany there's still a broad-based non-partisan consensus that this method should be used as a one-off and not as something to be continued, because this methodology, I can't say this for other member states, but for Germany, it wasn't very successful. As a representative of a federal state, when it comes to the national plan, the regional level wasn't involved. We have a lot of experience in the joint administration of funding, because we believe that these programs should be designed close to the place where they're to be implemented. And so the federal government just pulled old projects out of the drawer, and that wasn't very successful. So this principle of subsidiarity is just a decorative Sunday speech gimmick. Well, it's no longer as important as it should be, this principle of subsidiarity. We're talking about active subsidiarity, as Ahmed has just said it. To what extent is the level that is in charge of implementing laws, are they involved in coming up with new rules? The example of the German Bundesrat is good, because every law that was drafted by the federal government first goes to the Federal Council, the Bundesrat, and this is where it needs to be implemented. Then the federal government needs to voice its opinion, and then it is adopted. So the Committee of the Regions, well, to be honest, is a toothless tiger, because it comes up with opinions, but nobody needs to comply. So the real power is, well, just an informal one. There's no formal process. And I think that there's some need for improvements. And those who are supposed to implement these laws and rules, they need to be involved more before the rules are fixed. Okay, thank you. You're welcome to refer to what the previous speaker said, but in a final round of statements, I would like to move from the small scale to the big scale. Ursula von der Leyen said that her first commission was a geopolitical commission, and today we heard this time and again that Europe needs to learn to act in a geopolitical manner, also when it comes to enlargement. Now, Ms. Albrecht, what is missing when it comes to Europe and the European Union to become a more forceful geopolitical player, more than in the past? Or are we already a stronger player without this being perceived by the public? So far, the EU is a global player to a limited extent. It is through its economic strength to be able to define rules for global trade. So that shouldn't be underestimated. But as far as the other aspects are concerned, so the ones that are more genuine foreign policy aspects, well, there is a huge problem. You said it. We need to move away from this principle of unanimity. It doesn't work at 27 member states, and if individual countries can use a veto for various reasons, sometimes they are easy to understand than in other cases, but anyway, especially in extended union, we need majority rule, the majority vote. There's no political will to achieve this. So the question is, what could be done on the basis of the existing treaty? So the problem I see is that everything is done through these bridging clauses, the passerelles they're called. We need changes in the treaty, and there's no political will for changes to the treaty. And I believe that the need for this to be transposed into laws in the member states. So the Franco-German proposal has a lot of good ideas, but I think they could have pushed this more. And also the things that are coming from the European Parliament, that was developed after the conference on the future of Europe. So a number of important proposals were made there, but there's no political majority for that. There's no will to actually seriously discuss and negotiate this at the level of the Council. And the Commission itself is not strong enough in the final analysis to push this further. That is a real dilemma. So the question is, where should the political impetus come from, as long as the Council is faced with a situation where there is no support for more far-reaching reforms or for reforms that relate to the level of supranationalization or decentralization. So in which areas should there no longer be a principle of unanimity? Well, I think in the area of foreign policy, we should not need the principle of unanimity anymore. I think in terms of the sanctions for Ukraine, well, this is problematic. How Hungary uses its right to veto. Well, for other reasons. This is coupled with other business deals. So that's extremely problematic. And I think we need a majority vote when it comes to foreign and security policy. I know that this is also very painful for the Germans to accept that. This also means that as a large member state, or as the biggest member state, you may be outvoted by the others. But we need to have that consensus. Well, the problem is that it takes unanimity to abolish unanimity, right? Well, that's the reason why the Security Council will never be reformed. Mr. Hahn, we talked at length about the future rounds of enlargement. How should the European Union change at the institutional level? in order for such an enlargement step to be digestible and to ensure that the European Union can continue to work, to operate. I would like to briefly talk about the budget before I come to that. So in general, we can say that the Union has always developed based on crises. You may regret this fact or not, but that's a quite human fact. But anyway, when you're with the back against the wall, well, then we deliver. Then we're ready to deliver and to take action. So I'm confident that we are soon going to have such a majority rule or vote, for the simple reason that there will be a constraint that we will need to act. Aren't we already with the back against the wall? What are we still waiting for? Well, I don't want to paint this in too much of a rosy light, but we've just had a pandemic. The next big challenge is the war in Ukraine. Our support is unwavering. And indeed, we need to find a solution here. But of course, we also need to re-establish the territorial sovereignty, and it is up for Ukraine to define how such a possible peace might look. And based on what Mr. Skierto said, it takes two to tango. So if we want peace negotiations, then both sides need to be ready to negotiate. I see no indication that Putin is signaling his readiness to negotiate. So I wonder, how should we enter in such negotiations? As to the RAF, well, we have to say it was shooting from the hip out of necessity. And on the whole, it worked as far as the rapid recovery of the European Union was concerned in the economic terms. But I agree with you. Logically, there are a couple of weaknesses. We are aware of the weaknesses, and we should avoid these weaknesses in a future solution, especially as far as the involvement of the regions is concerned. Conversely, I have to say that together with the regions and the member states, we need to take this one step further. In fact, when it comes to local projects that have been implemented, we should focus on those that constitute a European value added. So there's still a lot of room for improvement there. A lot of projects that were funded with EU monies make sense, there's no doubt, but as far as the European value added is concerned, I have my doubt. So it is necessary for both sides to participate. We need the regional and local level for implementation, but we should implement those things that do indeed create a European value added. What do I mean by that? Well, to make sure that it's less abstract, when we are talking about promoting renewable energy sources in order to reduce our energy dependency on imports, well, that can only be implemented at the local and regional level. But of course, we can create a European value added by doing this together. Now, as to subsidiarity, subsidiarity means that we should promote and decide those things that are best suitable to achieve our goals. Now, currently what I'm seeing, and Austria is no exception to the rule, so we are seeing a trend to define subsidiarity. Well, the Commission should make all the preparations and we take the final decision. But it doesn't work like that. We need to be aware where decisions should be taken, and this is where they will be taken. This takes me to the next point. When it comes to decision making, we need to speed up. And This is why I say we need clear roles and responsibilities, who's in charge of what, and this is where the decisions should be taken. Already today, we have a very complex process of legislation in Europe, so it takes about 2 years on average for something to turn into a law. And we're not competitive with that. We need to change this. And by way of conclusion, Professor, more than 30 years ago, as a young manager, my former boss gave me an important lesson for life. The first 90% is just as demanding and laborious as the last 10%. And we are always aiming for 100%. We're never going to get anywhere. So let's go for 90%. And 90% is, for example, wherever possible, we should use the Basel rule so that we can develop the right atmosphere. And when it comes to customs for Chinese vehicles, well, Germany was outvoted and the world didn't collapse. And if this happens more frequently, we're going to get used to it, because at the European level, we know more or less where the trigger points are of our member states, and the national politicians know where the trigger points are for their regions, and the regions know where the trigger points are for their municipalities. So it is important to take this one step further, to have faith, but to also accept. We're talking about democracy, and democracy means that the majority decides. So there should be a majority decision that has to be respected. And in the final analysis, this contributes to work better in Europe than we are currently working.
Again, what kind of institutional changes we would need? Should, in the future, every country have a commissioner, just like now, for instance? What should the agriculture policy stay on as it is? Is that even conceivable if countries like Ukraine, for instance, join in? So what has to change, and how fast do we have to be in order to change things?
Thank you for the question. Well, I would agree that, and this is my personal view, that changing the decision-making processes for the common foreign security policy is currently the key. This is the key challenge. I don't see a rosy outlook for this, because as it was said, if I understood well in German, Madam Professor, that unanimity has to be changed only by unanimity, and it's a very difficult call. And for many European countries, it would be a political suicide to give up the unanimity and the national veto. At the same time, there are the number of cases where we see that unanimity is harming the EU action and actually even EU security. The number is growing. So, and it was mentioned with Hungary blocking financial assistance to Ukraine, the very the internal divisions as regards the Middle East. This is another test for the European Common Foreign Security Policy, because Europe has traditionally been a peacemaker or a mediator, and currently with no single voice, it's very difficult to play this role. We also need to send a clear signal to our partners. I think it's very important also now, before the upcoming US elections, about what Europe wants. So this is, and it's interesting that while the Russian aggression in Ukraine has made several processes move, has put some process in motion, like enlargement. It had been sleeping until then for 5 years. Enlargement, or fostering defense industry capacities, we can see much more dynamics here, but as regards changing the decision-making processes, we don't really see much dynamics there. There is a group of friends of QMB in Common Foreign Security Policy, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, only 12 member states are part of it, or observers, and the focus is really on the smaller changes which are allowed by the passerelle clauses, or by using the QMB for implementing decisions already taken by unanimity. But these are smaller issues compared to the big issue of reducing the number of unanimity votes in the EU. But here I need to make I have to say that the Czechia is quite reluctant also as regards the discussion on treaty of changes of treaties. That's definitely out of question. But also Czechia is quite reluctant also as regards moving away the unanimity principle.
Okay. What about Latvia?
Yes, very similar position.
Well, then it's hard to change things, right? In the end, it's hard to change things then, yes?
Yes, but we believe when it comes to EU reform, of course, everybody agrees that some changes are needed. Yeah, it's obvious. But we believe that we should go step by step. And at the June European Council, the leaders approved the roadmap. Yeah, and first we agreed to deal with values. And from our point of view, that is a correct approach, because without values, we don't have anything in a European Union, no single market, no other important things for us. Then we go to the policies. We agree which kind of policies we are having or we're going to have, bearing in mind enlargement. And then we agree on budget, on money, how to finance that. And then lastly, we agree on institutions. If you build a house, what do you do first? You care about the basement, right?
Yeah.
About values, yeah. Then you build the walls, yeah. Then you think what will be inside. And then you think how to govern it, yeah. From our perspective,
Yes.
it's like this.
But obviously it doesn't work like that in reality, right?
Why not? We never
Why?
tried.
Because, yeah, of course. But institutional changes should have been done years ago, in fact. But, yeah, just didn't work out.
Yes, but you know, is the QMV solution to all problems? My answer would be no. Unfortunately not. It's an illusion that it's a solution. Because, well, would that strengthen the EU unity? No. Would the decisions which, without any doubt, we could take much faster and visibly much efficiently, would they be implemented? And if not, would that add to EU credibility? In my view, no.
Herr Speich, Sie haben jetzt sozusagen die ehrenvolle Aufgabe, das noch so.
Speich, you have the honorable task of rounding off the debate and summarize it. Now, if you think about the way in which the European Union should change in order to be fit for the future, can we summarize? Where should we start? I think that the big problem is that, and that has been described repeatedly, we are facing enormous geopolitical challenges. And the big question is whether it's enough to have a process of incremental change. We've always trusted in that. But for a historical reason, I would like to go a bit farther back. North Rhine-Westphalia, after the war, we were created out of two provinces. And the biggest reform process that took place on German territory in the past 200 years came after 1806. That was the defeat in battle. That was the beginning of the Prussian reforms. the administrative reform, the military reform. So these are principles that still apply today. The big question is whether Europe wants to see another such battle in order to launch a reform process that is more than just incremental. I think we can't afford that. I think it is correct to move forward and to do what we can do, but I think if we really want to take our geopolitical agency seriously, we need to take this one step further. And then a purely incremental approach is not enough. Mr. Hahn? I fully agree with you. We need to do both. The low-hanging fruit should be harvested, and at the same time, we need to launch a bigger process. And one last idea, because this is something that our colleagues have also referred to, the loss of sovereignty. This is what it is about, right? So I believe that we should all be aware, including Germany, but now I'm talking about Latvia, the Czech Republic, Austria. All these are countries with less than 10 million inhabitants. So where would we be in a world of 8 billion? In an EU of 450 million with fixed rules, we can all have a say if we want to. And thus we can defend our interests, and we can shape a European position which is then capable of making its influence felt at the global level. So if you want to protect your sovereignty, if you want to develop and promote it, you need to do that in those areas where you need the global outreach. And you need to be ready to delegate some things in order to ensure that the interests of your citizens will also be guaranteed in future. So that is a reasonable approach, which admittedly is not an easy idea, but my request would be that the national and regional representatives, not only in the area of politics, but also coming from the media and academia, should pursue this idea and defend it, because that's the only way we can create the foundation to make major changes and reforms.
A very nice buzzword that is, and we have to accelerate. You also said we have some time problems here. So my thanks now go to all of you, also to the listeners. And what we're having now is a short break, and then on we go at 11:45. Okay, thank you very much. 11:45.